Hello everyone and welcome to the Nature Briefing Chat podcast. This is the show where we chat through some of the stories that we've been reading about in the Nature Briefing, which is a weekly email newsletter from Nature. And today, your usual hosts are away, but you've got me, I'm Shamini Bundell, and we've also got...
Lizzie Gibney.
Hi Lizzie.
Hi, thank you for including me today, Shamini.
Let's dive straight in, and I'm going to start us off this week. This is a Nature feature, and it's all about eyewitness memory and kind of improving the way the legal system deals with eyewitness memory using science.
The main thing I know is that we are so incredibly fallible. I always think of that. There's that meme of, them people playing basketball and there's a gorilla that you just don't see unless you're told about it. And that has really freaked me out ever since I saw that.
They give you a job like count how many throws there are in the basketball team. And because you're focused on that, you don't notice a person in a gorilla suit walking through the basketball match.
But basically, my brain isn't doing the things I think it's doing, is what I took from that. So I would be quite worried myself as an eyewitness.
For a long time now, there has been this sort of understanding that it can be really unreliable. And one particular big thing that happened was DNA evidence became available. And people went back and looked at previous cases where they still had evidence that they could take DNA from and overturned loads of convictions. And so there's the Innocence Project in the US, which does this. And some of their data shows that when they're looking at the kind of thing that contributed to some of these like false convictions that later got overturned, a huge number of them, a big proportion of them involved eyewitness misidentification.
So then how do you factor that in then if you've got a fresh case coming up? How do you direct a jury into like how much to trust eyewitness evidence if we know that it's failed so often in the past?
Well, there has been lots of changes to how things are done in order to sort of try and improve the accuracy of various things. So, for example, police lineups is a big one because that's when, you're bringing someone in and saying, do you remember what the suspect looked like? Is it any of these people? And there are lots of things that you can kind of do wrong with the police lineups that might skew the results you get. Like, let's say I'm a witness and there's a police officer saying, do any of these people look suspicious to you? If that police officer knows who the suspect is,
right,
I can like pick up subtle cues or like that can in some way influence things.
It's not a blinded study, basically.
Exactly.
If they know the answer already, even if they don't mean to, they can be subtly kind of hinting towards that person. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a bit of a mire trying to figure out how much we can trust these things. But what this feature is about the role that confidence plays. So if you were on a jury and someone is like, no, honestly, I definitely know it was this person. I definitely remember. How much would that sway you in sort of judging that eyewitness testimony?
I think it would sway me a lot. But then actually probably mainly what it tells you is more about that person than about necessarily what they saw.
So in general, people have dismissed confidence, and there's been results that basically previously showed that how confident a witness is kind of irrelevant to how likely they were to be accurate or not. However, this has more recently been potentially overturned. So this is the sort of new science that they're talking about in this feature, which is basically saying actually confidence can be, in certain situations, really relevant. And one of the examples just given in this feature as a sort of case study is there was a witness who saw a crime and described two white men with long hair, and she did a police lineup and did not identify any of those people. One of them was the suspect that the police were, pretty confident could be involved. And by the time it got to court, this witness told the jury she was over 100% sure that was the guy she'd seen. And the key thing here is the difference between the confidence when they're in court sometime later and at the moment where they're first sort of being presented with a lineup, say. And so what some of the researchers mentioned in this feature are looking at is what the immediate confidence was, and when they're there in the lineup and you ask them how long it takes them to make that decision, right?
Oh.
Either they're like, yeah, it's that one
decision,
or like the longer it takes them to go, let me think, like that correlates with actually how accurate that is.
The quicker they do it, the more accurate.
Yeah, exactly. But the sort of key finding, and which was a bit controversial because it kind of went against the prevailing wisdom, is that in this sort of particular trial, when the people initially in sort of very ideal circumstances were really confident that their identifications were correct, they almost always were. They were like 97% correct. Whereas when they weren't confident, then it was kind of a bit over 50-50 whether or not, it was right or not. So one important thing to take away from that is, what is the confidence in that immediate time after? But then the other element in here, which is quite interesting, is in that case we talked about, the witness, the first time she saw that lineup, the witness didn't pick out the suspect at all. And generally, at the moment, if you have a lineup and the witness doesn't get the person, or like maybe picks the wrong person, that is not given much significance. And so there's some suggestion that actually that's really important to know. That could be, in fact, negative evidence.
Yeah, well, that's like a nil result.
Yeah, exactly.
Basically, isn't it? It's the kind of thing that people say, oh, this hypothesis didn't bear out, so we're not going to publish that. We're just going to leave that in the drawer.
So there's also interesting ways in which perhaps this process could be improved. Actually getting that out there in the field, as it were, applying it to the judicial system, that is easier said than done.
So what would you want to do? You'd want to know when you were having this eyewitness testimony, you'd want to know how sure they were in the immediate aftermath, or how long it took them to decide. That would be important information for a jury to know how credible that.
And like the data suggests that is relevant.
The other spanner in the works I was just thinking about, in all of these studies, presumably their data point on whether that person did the crime or not is what the trial found?
No, at least some of these studies, they've set it up.
Okay. This isn't like observational data. Okay.
No, this is, at least in some of these cases, based on getting volunteers to like fake crimes and then asking people like, have you seen this person before? And then they say yes or no. So yes, it is useful to be able to know.
Yeah, you know for sure.
Before you, yeah, absolutely. But really interesting stuff, and just all this stuff about memory and what we think we remember and how our memories can be swayed is just fascinating.
Fascinating and kind of terrifying.
Yeah, we'll put a link to that feature in the show notes.
Well, that did remind me a little bit, actually, because this whole idea of the evidence that ends up being used versus that which isn't is quite tied to what I'm going to talk about, which is the first registered report that Nature has published. So Nature had an editorial on this and also published the journal paper. And so a registered report is when you have a study and you submit for peer review just the plan. You submit your research plan and your methodology, like the statistical tests that you're going to do, and in certain cases, your like the hypothesis that you're testing. And then that goes to peer review. And what happens is the journal then either says, yes, we think this is good enough, and the peer reviewers say this is a very worthy question, let's do it. And the journal commits to publishing your results, whatever they are.
So yeah, this has been such a problem for such a long time, hasn't it? That a big snazzy journal is going to say like, oh, science, well, is it exciting and new? And did you find something good? If not, nah. And then everything that gets published is all of the positive results and ignoring all the potentially more negative results that could have come out of the same kind of thing.
And it means that, people go down dead ends all the time, because there's a study that actually someone else has done and it came up with a negative result. And so people then don't bother publishing it because
they don't even know it happened.
And then another team will go, oh, that's interesting, let's explore that. And so you can have so much time wasted, and very similar things to what we were talking about when it comes to criminal trials. Like, is there some subtle biases going on? We're not saying anyone's doing anything deliberately, but where if you have a result and you want to get that, you expect that as your answer, you might slightly tweak the analyses that you do. You might think, well, we got nothing when we ran this test, let's try running this other test. So the idea with a registered report is that you say up front everything you're going to do.
So this stops the p hacking as well. You have to say which analyses you're going to run in advance as well.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. And in this case, so I'll tell you a bit about the actual study as well that's been published, because it's kind of cool. Another benefit is that you can do quite ambitious projects because it's going to be published. There's no risk to it. So this specific paper was a study of users on Blue Sky, social media platform, and it looked at 2,000 users before and after the last US election in 2024. Okay. And the researchers were trying to figure out if the algorithms that the platform uses, they are tailored to drive engagement. If by using those algorithms, to decide what goes top of your feed, if that amplifies this kind of toxic, outrage-driven, kind of political, divisive content.
Is this one of those where they are working with the social media platform and getting them to tweak the algorithms? Okay.
So Blue Sky is one of the, in fact, I think now the only social media platform that will let you do this, that give this access to researchers. Okay. And so they ran 3 different algorithms. They had this one, which was the kind of classic social media algorithm, amplifies engagement. They had one which was just most recent first, reverse chronological.
Okay, yeah, old school.
And then they have their own tailored algorithm that tried to kind of dampen down the extreme voices.
Oh.
To create more diversity and make it hopefully a little bit less toxic. And it took about a year. The researcher who led this project said it was like running a startup for a year, and they had to hire a software engineer and everything. So this was just like such a huge project to do. Yeah. And one of the reasons that they were able to do it was because they knew, because it had already been, their research methodology had been approved. They knew that it was going to be published either way.
Yeah. And for researchers, being published is a big part of getting more funding and
absolutely
things like that.
And so, do you want to know what the results were?
Yeah, I kind of hope it's a negative result just to prove the point.
A few things. So they found that yes, these engagement kind of based algorithms do bump up your prevalence of moral outrage and political content.
So they put the algorithm in. What were they measuring?
They were measuring what users saw and how politically sensitive or divisive that was. So did they see more kind of toxic posts as a result of the algorithm, like depending on which algorithm they had, what did they see? So they looked at what did people see, kind of how prevalent these different types of posts were. And indeed, they found that if you're trying to maximize engagement, you do end up with seeing a lot of divisive and toxic content. And then the other thing they found was they were looking at how much that affected people's kind of perceptions of social norms and what the world thought. If you're seeing all these outrageous posts, what does that make you think about the people who are around you? Yeah. And it did increase perception that there was like partisan division, but actually people underestimated how prevalent toxic content was, possibly because the researchers said when people saw these very like awful toxic posts, they also saw people condemning that and criticizing it and commenting it. Yes.
So they, as well as looking at more engagement is more of certain types of posts, potentially negative posts, they also actually asked the people
how did that influence of it, how they viewed their social world around them. And so the other thing that they did was ask them, did surveys as to how much they were enjoying the platform. And here is what I think is the really good news of this study, is that people reported equal or even greater enjoyment of the platform when they had this algorithm that was deliberately designed to reduce toxic content. So they were able to make a social media platform that was still engaging and enjoyable, but didn't have that kind of like, there's a car crash, but I can't help looking at it element that leaves you feeling a bit dirty once you've been like scrolling for a while. So it does seem like you could make a platform that would actually be just a much nicer, healthier place to hang out. And that is possible. That world is out there. But
I feel so cynical that I'm like, I don't think that doesn't seem right. That's not how social media works, but maybe.
And the other thing, though, that was interesting, which may not have been included if it wasn't a registered report, was a kind of negative finding in that seeing all of this toxic content didn't influence people's own behaviour. So that was one of the questions, was if you are, at an end of this fire hose of like people being angry and political and, moral outrage, does that also make you behave in that way? And they found that it didn't, which is kind of good news.
How did they work that one out? How did they find that?
Well, they looked at the posts that people were making themselves, and all of this they did like content analysis. So they had LLMs and trying to figure out, like what was the main point of each post that people wrote, and particular keywords and things that would be associated with more divisive language. And so that was something which the researchers said was kind of a negative finding. Like you would think that people would themselves maybe become a little bit more riled up and toxic themselves if that's what they're fed.
Post to match
exactly, but that did not happen.
Did the people volunteer for this?
They paid them
on Blue Sky.
They paid them, but they were real users. So that was another thing actually that came out of it, was in the peer review process, they had been planning to use when you just get volunteers like students, like, hey, come in and do this study. And the peer reviewers suggested that maybe they should use real users already kind of have a vested interest.
Yes.
It is their real life, their real world online. The results are likely to be more credible as a result of that. And that was something that peer reviewers suggested and they were able to work in. So yeah.
Basically, you're collaborating with your peer reviewers before you've even done the experiment.
Exactly.
And we mentioned that this has been sort of a topic of discussion for ages. Why has it taken so long? It's 2026 and this is the first one of these that they've done?
So it was 2023 that Nature first started allowing them.
Okay.
And then I guess, it's not that crazy that a study like this would take, I think it's the 2024 election that they were looking at. And then they did all the analysis and they had to do all the prep for that. So science takes a while. But yeah, you're right in that Nature was certainly not the first journal by a very long stretch to have these registered reports. What's changing at Nature and what was in this editorial is that actually it's being expanded now. So this particular example with the Blue Sky study was one of those classic ones where you're testing a hypothesis. But Nature is now saying that they'll accept a wider range of studies, like ones where you're comparing two different scientific methods, or you're just collecting a huge data set on behalf of the scientific community, kind of different types of studies, and in all the fields as well. Initially, it was restricted to social science and behavioral science, and I think neuroscience. Now it's going to be for all the different fields that Nature studies. So if you out there have an idea, basically, it can be, not anything, but there's a lot of different things, different types of study that can be registered reports now. And it is a slog, right? Like there's two different separate rounds of peer review, and it can be quite intensive, but
more peer review. That's what everyone's really asking for out here.
How long have people been saying, I wish there was just more peer review. Can I peer review a bit more, please? That'd be great. But it really does seem to make studies more rigorous. And so I think the results really do speak for themselves. So it's a really good practice, and let's hope we get more of them.
And there is an editorial on this very topic, which you can read on nature.com, or we're just going to put a link to it in the show notes for your convenience.
Nice and easy.
Along with a link for where you can sign up to the Nature Briefing, where you can get stories like these and other ones directly to your email inbox. And I think that's it for today. But don't forget, if you want to drop us a review, some stars.
Tell Nick and Ben how nice it was to have Lizzie and Shamini step in for
exactly
for a briefing chat.
Big us up in the comments. Give us some stars and see you next time.
Bye-bye.